Welcome back to the Red Path. Today, we're going to take a look at the movement phase. Before I start discussing strategy and tactics, I'd like to give a massive shout out to the Patreons of the channel. Their support is absolutely amazing, and I appreciate it way more than I can express. As the channel continues to grow way beyond my expectations, support from folks like you is going to help continue to let me improve the quality of the content I put out. I also want to give a quick shout out to Lasshammer on Instagram. Lasshammer is a popular hobbyist and co-owner of Rise from Resin, a 3D printing business in the UK. She's just recently got some work in on some 30k era World Eaters as shown on the screen. Please consider going and giving her Insta and business alike, and appreciate a talented creator serving the blood god. Okay, now on to the main content. About 2 years ago, I wrote an article in the World Eaters Legion Facebook group giving a narrative bent to my views on the overall strategy of playing World Eaters. You can check out the written version in the group link below, and also check the first part of the video series here. The second part of the strategy deals with movement in general, and how capitalising on mobility and speed is of great importance. First, I'll read what I originally wrote and then go into detail and provide examples and ideas. The downward swing. This movement can most easily be compared to the first and possibly second turn. It is here where the most crucial tactical decisions will need to be made by the World Eater. Getting the most out of 1 or 2 turns of movement to join the melee is vital. Whether this involves multiple transport advances, deep striking, demonic summoning, or whatever else, here is where accuracy matters. If the axe falls but misses the mark, a significant resource has been wasted and will likely contribute to eventual defeat. The connection of blade to meat is of paramount importance. Thus, the World Eater must ensure that movement in the first few turns is accurate and of utmost celerity. The downward swing must necessarily be swift and violent. It is the defining aspect of an axe swing. The raised blade is the act of challenge, and the swing is the beginning of violence. There are no pauses for diplomacy once the descent has begun. The maximum amount of ground must be covered as swiftly as possible. So whilst this was written with 8th edition in mind, we can fairly readily translate it into 9th edition language. First, let's look at the overall strategy we need to focus on with World Eaters, and then look into specific tactical decisions we can make on the tabletop to get the most out of our Berserker Horde. As a combat army that, even when bolstered by strong range support, wins its games based on the fight phase, we need to ensure we create opportunities to maximise our efficiency in combat. Typically, this is going to mean getting the most combat units we can safely into combat to eviscerate or neutralise enemy threats. Having a strong understanding of how to properly move will only support this strategy. So let's consider what objectives we are trying to achieve. 1. Scoring the most points, whether through primary or secondary objectives. 2. Negating the opponent's opportunity to score more points. And 3. Claiming as many skulls as possible. Now I know many of you will argue that claiming skulls should be number 1, and if that's how you like to play, by all means go for it. My tactical videos tend to focus on getting the most return on your World Eaters from an optimised point of view. The way I justify it to myself narratively is that a dead Berserker can't claim any more skulls or increase their honour before Khorne, so keeping them alive one more turn is only serving the Blood God better. Scoring points for World Eaters tends to focus more on movement and kill-based metrics. Obviously, primary objectives require solid movement to maximise, coupled with durability and counter-offensive tactics, but I've argued that mobility-based secondaries tend to also be our favoured alternative scoring method. Engage on all fronts and deploy scramblers, for example. Putting yourself in a position to begin capitalising from turn 2 on for that bountiful 15 primary victory points and maxing secondaries as quickly as possible is a sure way to have a strong chance of victory. But sometimes just scoring well isn't enough, and neutralising your opponent's opportunities is more desirable or perhaps the only option. And of course, killing enemy models is necessary, but not always priority. But it can be the number one at certain key moments. Clearing off an OBSEC unit from a swing primary objective can have huge ramifications to the overall score. So how does moving affect these aspects? Well, here's an easily memorable acronym for you. PPP. Posture, Position, Preparation. Posture, well, you deploy your forces in such a way as to capitalise on the objectives, terrain, and enemy deployment. Position refers to locating critical positions of the battlefield that you expect to have to apply pressure to ensure victory bends to your will. Preparation is essentially ensuring your posture or deployment is focused towards how to position your forces for critical moments in the game. So how do you apply this? Well, let's get tactical. First, protect your units. There are multiple ways to protect your units, and as I've mentioned several times, you should try and build your list to be versatile, able to go first and to go second. Going first is often not too much of an issue for a well-prepared World Eaters force. Tools like Apoplectic Frenzy and our reliance on transports make initial movement relatively powerful, and as we tend to lack shooting and psychic, we are not draining efficiency on turn 1 by not using it, as much as a more shooty army might do with no viable targets. Options available are transports, rhinos, land raiders, dreadclaws, storm eagles, etc. Having squads of berserkers or other key infantry units protected by an armoured box adds an effective force field to your game-winning units. And reserves, by putting your terminators in deep strike or paying command points to stick a defiler out of harm's way turn 1, yes, you lose the kill power for that first round, but they also cannot be destroyed and retain their efficiency a little longer. It's a trade-off, but one that strongly favours you. Tactical positioning. Placing units behind obscuring or line-of-sight blocking terrain to protect against all but the most dedicated enemy fire will save far more wounds than any invulnerable save. If you cannot be shot at, you don't need to risk the dice god's ire. But be cognizant of enemy units that can shoot without line of sight. These are typically bolt gun-like profiles, decent volume at strength 4 with no AP and 1 damage, but against infantry, this can be devastating early on. Once you've postured well, with your army fairly safe and protected, the next consideration is how you're going to move out to cover ground and score points, and also threaten enemy positions. Here's where a good understanding of objective locations and terrain rules comes to play. It's no good moving a vehicle like a Mauler Fiend into cover behind a wall if it can't readily move out in its next movement phase to slice and dice. I'm not saying charge it blindly down a fire lane, but strongly consider what terrain it may be able to move over or around quickly. Traits like difficult ground and breachable and even scalable are especially important for mobility. Difficult ground for everything, breachable and scalable for infantry swarms and beasts, etc. Planning your first turn moves is imperative. Remember, whilst you don't score in your first turn, you do score primaries at the end of your turn 2 command phase, so being well positioned to gain at least 10 victory points at the end of your first movement phase is vital, and depending on the mission, trying to gain all 15 can be very powerful too. Here's where World Eaters start to get something of an advantage. We have 2 key abilities, neither of which are unique to us, but ones we necessarily want to use regardless of scoring points. Apoplectic Frenzy and Transports. Frenzy is a well-documented stratagem that allows any World Eaters infantry unit to move 9 inches before their first turn. Order of operations for precisely when this happens is essentially determined by who won the first turn. If you won, you move a unit first. If your opponent won, they do. If they have a similar ability, move theirs first, alternating until all units with this ability have been moved. Obviously, Raptors are such an immensely popular target of this tactic, as their 12 inches of movement can effectively give them 21 inches of normal movement on the first turn, which in many situations can allow for a strong opening gambit. Due to how Frenzy works, if you are committing a couple fast infantry units, and I do recommend Raptors, place them in a position with 2 movement choices. The first will be a strategic location, for instance behind a wall whilst holding an objective after their 21 inches of movement, or the second option, moving into a safe position if you don't get first turn. Transports are vital, and I'd wager that the average World Eaters player owns twice the number of transports that many other faction players do, except in perhaps Black Templars and Orcs. At the moment, Rhinos are our most obvious choice. For 80 points, they offer 10 ablative wounds at toughness 7 with a 3-up save, a 12-inch movement with a probable advance, and currently a one-time -1 to hit with smoke launchers. Using a Rhino to ferry 2 squads of 5 Berserkers 12 to 18 inches closer to a prime objective can be clutch. Your opponent will have to break the shell before they can get to the juicy targets inside, and here's what I recommend. Position your Rhinos as best as possible. If you can, hide them or shield them behind LOS blocking or obscuring terrain, but give them a reasonable move, I'd say about 15 inches including the advance, to a key strategic location, an objective most likely, but so when the Rhino is inevitably destroyed, the unit inside can disembark behind more obscuring cover, or at least into cover that gives them a +1 to their armor save. Anything you can do to thwart your opponent's killing potential is a plus at this stage. Depending on how much shooting your opponent has left, you should always keep the emergency disembark stratagem in your back pocket to get them the full 6 inches out, which could place them on an objective prior to your next command phase, and as an OBSEC unit, they will at least likely contest it, if not score it for you. It's also worth noting that if you have multiple box-shaped vehicles, Rhinos, Land Raiders, Predators, etc., moving together, you can, in a pinch, disembark models behind another one and use it as an LOS blocking piece of equipment. Depending on how you've built your models, a typical Chaos Space Marine body at the current time will almost certainly be entirely covered by a Chaos Rhino with sufficient spiky bits. So, with the correct posturing and positioning alluded to here, you should be in a solid position to maximise your movement by being fully prepared. And what are some of the other things to bear in mind? I cannot stress enough the importance of knowing where objectives are in relation to your force, and ensuring you have waves of units able to move on and claim or contest them. Most 2,000 point games have 5 or 6 objectives, and there will often be a ruckus over the central objectives, which is generally where a well-built World Eaters list will excel, especially when commanded by a prepared general. Pre-measuring and positioning units to capitalise on these vital victory points will make winning the games that much easier. Constantly communicating with your opponent about your intent fairly and honestly is also something to keep in mind. For instance, saying, "I'm placing this squad 9 inches from your vehicle because they move 10 inches from the deployment zone," and gesturing to what you are referring to can save you if a model gets knocked down or you accidentally place it half an inch too far away when you measure your charge. Being aware of any shenanigans your opponent can play is also integral, and this often boils down to experience, but there's nothing wrong with quickly asking an opponent pre-game if they have anything that modifies movement or charges. A good opponent will be open about this information. Ultimately, mastering your deployment and how to get the most from your first movement phase or two is absolutely critical to your chance of success in a game. Your Berserkers aren't trading well if they just die because they footslog across open ground, and your Raptors waste points and CP if you don't try and protect them from incidental fire in the early turns. There will always be exceptions to this, baiting an opponent or drawing firepower, but as a rule, you need to master the movement phase to provide the resilience and staying power the World Eaters otherwise lack. Okay, I hope this video has helped you think a little deeper about how to maximise your efficiency in the movement phase, and also deployment and pre-game moves, so you can start getting those victories more often on the tabletop. As ever, if you've enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. If you didn't, well, hit the thumbs down. I'd appreciate you subscribing if you haven't already, and please consider supporting the channel through any of the options below, Patreon, Ko-Fi and my Amazon affiliate links. Till next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill main burn.